The light freighter bargain hunter moved through space, silver gray against the blackness, the light of the distant stars reflecting from its hull. Its running lights were muted, its navigational beacons quiet, its viewports, for the most part, as dark as the space around it. Its drive, gunning for all it was worth. Clenching his teeth firmly together, George Cardass got a grip on his seat's armrest with one hand, as he finished punching coordinates into the nav computer with the other. Just in time, the bargain hunter jerked hard to the left as a pair of brilliant green blaster bolts burned past the bridge canopy. Cardass took a deep breath.
This is not what I signed up for,
he muttered to himself. Barely 6 standard months after signing on with Kento and Maris, this was already the second time they'd have to run for their lives from someone. And this time, it was a hut they'd frizzled. His thoughts were cut off by a screech from somewhere aft, and the flashing blaster bolts were replaced by star lines as the bargain hunter shot into hyperspace. As the ships traveled through hyperspace, Cardass could see the nav readings shift as they passed by each region of space, through the outer rim and into the unknown regions. There was a twitter on the comm.
We're being hailed,
Cardass reported, frowning as he keyed it on. He threw a look at the visual displays, searching for their unknown caller, and felt his whole body go rigid. He was cut off by a deep rumbling chuckle from the comm.
So, Dubrak Kento,
An all too familiar voice rumbled in Huttese.
you think to escape me so easily?
You call that easy?
Kento muttered as he keyed his transmitter.
Oh, hi, Proga. Look, like I told you before, I can't let you have these furs. I've already contracted with Drixo.
Ignore the furs. Show me your hidden treasure hoard.
Kento frowned at Maris.
My what?
Do not play the fool.
Praga warned, his voice going an entire octave deeper.
Cardass, where is he? 100 kilometers off the starboard bow, and he's coming up fast.
A light flashed on Cardass's proximity sensor.
Incoming!
He snapped, his eyes darting back and forth among the displays as he searched for the source of the attack. Cardass had it now, coming from directly beneath the bargain hunter, a long, dark missile arrowing straight towards them.
There!
He said, pointing a finger straight down as he stared at the display. It was only then that his brain caught up with the fact that this wasn't the vector a missile would take from the approaching hut ship. He was opening his mouth to point that out when the missile suddenly burst open, its nose ejecting a wad of some kind of material. The wad began to expand as it cleared the shards of its container, opening like a fast-blooming flower into a filmy wall stretching over a kilometer across. A multiple blaze of green blaster fire erupted from the direction of the hut ship. Just 6 minutes later, the hut ship blasted into flames. Three alien ships approached the bargain hunter, each not much bigger than a standard Republic cruiser. A boarding tunnel then began extending itself towards the service hatch as Kento prepared to stand by.
Here we go,
Kento muttered, drawing himself to his full height and keying the release. The three were immediately met by 2 of the alien crew waiting outside the hatch as it slid open. Blue-skinned humanoids with glowing red eyes and blue-black hair, dressed in impeccable uniformity. Escorted by the 2 guards, they headed down the tunnel, through an open doorway, and into what Cardass identified as a conference room.
I'm Dubrak Kento, captain of the bargain hunter. I don't suppose you happen to speak basic?
Cybisti will do, the alien behind the table said calmly in that language. Please, be seated.
Thank you,
Kento said, pulling out chairs for himself and Maris and nodding to Cardass to do likewise. I am Commander Mitth'raw'nuruodo of the Chiss Ascendancy, the alien continued. This is the Springhawk, Picket Force 2 command vessel of the Expansionary Defense Fleet. On the other side of the galaxy, one of the largest attempts at galactic exploration was underway. The Outbound Flight, commanded by the brusque and bold Jedi Master Jorus C'baoth, had taken off just a few days prior to the three smugglers' encounter with Thrawn. The project itself was an ambitious endeavor to establish a colony on the far side of the unknown regions. One that, while did not sit well with the Jedi Council, had gathered enough favor with the Chancellor to have been brought into fruition. 18 of the Order's most prominent knights and masters, along with an odd 50,000 of Coruscant's more adventurous populace, left in 29 BBY on the massive linkage of 6 fully operational dreadnoughts that would become known as the Outbound Flight. But in the shadows, enemies lingered. One of Palpatine's oldest and most trusted aides, Kinman Doriana, was the Chancellor's right-hand man when it came to issues regarding the Jedi. But like most, he knew the Chancellor and Darth Sidious as two completely different people. In fact, he believed that in serving Sidious, he was in turn betraying Palpatine himself. And the Dark Lord did nothing to discourage these misconceptions. Under Sidious's orders, Doriana sought the help of the Trade Federation's droid army, which he planned to use to intercept and destroy the Outbound Flight as it passed out of Republic territory, effectively killing a near 24 Jedi, as well as discrediting the Jedi Council's choices in one fell swoop. The bargain hunter's brief detour stretched on as the crew, now Thrawn's prisoners, were taken to a temporary military base located on the inside of a large asteroid. Thrawn took a special interest in Republic culture and language, going so far as to ask Cardass to teach him Galactic Basic, in exchange for both their freedom, as well as an opportunity to learn the language of the Chiss for themselves. Of the three smugglers, Cardass drew Thrawn's eye as the most observant, the most similar to himself in a sense. And though he was a prisoner, as was the rest of his crew, they were treated as guests. As Cardass soon discovered, Thrawn was not only a brilliant military tactician, but also an incredibly fast learner. It was only a few weeks before Thrawn spoke fluent Basic, while Cardass still struggled to form coherent sentences in Chun. It wasn't until then that Thrawn told the whole crew the real reason behind their rushed capture. He suspected that far beyond the unknown regions, in the depth of uncharted space, was a race of ferocious and remarkably aggressive beings. He had encountered a scout force not far off their current location, and barely managed to put it down. Years later, Thrawn's theory would be proven correct, as the intergalactic species known as the Yuuzhan Vong would invade Republic space and terrorize the galaxy. Thrawn claimed that this was why he needed to make sure the Republic were a non-threat, why he'd been waging a war against the alien Vigari species this far off Chiss mainland. He needed to make sure that when the Yuuzhan Vong came, as he was sure they would, the Chiss wouldn't be forced into a two-way war. Doriana was still fumbling with his tunic belt as he hurried through the open blast doors onto the bridge. "This is Commander Mitth'raw'nuruodo of the Chiss Expansionary Defense Fleet," a voice said. "Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." Outside the viewport, 3 small cruisers and 9 fighters were positioned in front of the Trade Federation's fleet, not nearly firepower to drive them out by force. At least, that's what Doriana thought. The Neimoidian Cav seemed to have similar thoughts, and to much the Kinman's horror, launched a full-scale attack. Hundreds of droid starfighters soared through space towards the task force as the Chiss ships prepared to take evasive action. Seconds later, the small cruisers came into range, and the Vice Lord tapped at his board, signaling for a barrage of lasers that would surely destroy the few vessels in front of them. But to Doriana's disbelief, the droids didn't respond. On the other side of the battle, Cardass looked to Thrawn with a puzzled look on his face. "The command signal uses a rolling encryption," Thrawn explained as the Springhawk shot forward past the now vanished outer defense screen. "But with so many fighters requiring signals, I knew the rotation would have to be a limited one." It turns out that there are only 3 separate encryption patterns for this group. I simply recorded the version the droids would be expecting next, then broadcast it to them with enough power to override whatever their masters in the battleship were trying to send. Minutes later, only 2 Trade Federation battleships were still left standing. Face to face with the commander behind their fleet's demise, Doriana reluctantly told Thrawn the true nature behind his mission, and introduced him to Darth Sidious, who not only was impressed by the commander's military ingenious, but also confirmed the threats of a potentially apocalyptic intergalactic species, fascinated by both the concept of the Jedi and that of the outbound flight, yet fully aware of what Doriana was trying to manipulate him to do, destroy it. Thrawn played along. He would see the ship for himself before making any rash decisions. Thrawn was a trial-born of the 8th and most powerful ruling family of the Chiss, and thus, he was held to a strict standard of Chiss military custom, which dictated a reactionary rather than preventative measure of combat. Thrawn disagreed heavily with this state of mind, and his actions in destroying the Vagari species, as well as capturing the 3 Republic smugglers, placed him in deep disfavor with the ruling families of the Chiss. He knew that destroying outbound flight would likely be the last straw, an act so treasonous that one of the other ruling families would likely be able to use it not only to dismiss him of command, but also strip him of his royal rank and title. When outbound flights finally arrived, they were greeted by the sights of hundreds of Vagari battleships, lured into position by both Cardass and the careful planning of Thrawn himself. Sabayoth, gathering the other 17 Jedi on the ship, initiated a Jedi meld, channeling their combined power through him as they spread confusion across the Vagari commanders. Then, the alien mind suddenly began exploding into death. And not just a small sensation either. These deaths came in a thunderstorm torrent, wave after wave of fear and agony and rage that hammered against the Jedi's already stretched minds. 1,000 alien voices shrieked through their brains as their life forces were snuffed out, with 1,000 more waiting behind them. Beside Doriana, Thrawn took a deep breath. "Tra," he ordered, and moving as a single unit, the Chiss fleet surged forward. The other Chiss ships broke from their flanks, each spreading out towards one of the 6 dreadnoughts positioned in front of them. Then, they opened fire. They hit the weapon blasters first, the brilliant blue fire of the Chiss lasers tearing through armor and capacitors, and charging equipment, and digging deeply into the blasters themselves. The shield generators were next, the Springhawk zigzagging across the dreadnought's hull as it fired and destroyed each in turn. All done with the utmost efficiency, a small detached part of Doriana's mind noted, without a single wasted movement. Disarmed and unable to defend itself, the outbound flight floated motionless in front of them. Thrawn signaled its command deck and gave a single message. "You are broken and defenseless. I give you one final chance to surrender and return to the Republic." For a long while, nobody replied. Then, there was a sudden hiss from the comm.
"So,
An almost unrecognizable voice ground out.
you think you've won, alien?"
The display came alive, and a cold shiver ran up Doriana's back. It was Joruus C'baoth, pale and disheveled, his clothing torn and blood-splattered, one side of his face badly burned. But his eyes blazed with the same arrogant fire that Doriana had seen the day long ago in Supreme Chancellor's office. He groped for Mitth'raw'nuruodo's sleeve. "Kev is right. You have to destroy them," he hissed urgently. "If you don't, we're dead." Thrawn's eyes flicked onto him, then back to the comm. "I have indeed won," he told C'baoth. "I only have to give a single order." His hand shifted slightly on the control board, his fingertips coming to rest on a covered switch edged in red. "And you and all of your people will die." Is your pride worth so much to you?
A Jedi does not yield to pride.
Sabayoth spat.
Nor does he yield to empty threats. He follows only the dictates of his own destiny.
Then choose your destiny, Thrawn said. I'm told the role of the Jedi is to serve and defend.
You were told wrongly.
Sabayoth countered.
The role of the Jedi is to lead and guide, and to destroy all threats.
The unburned corner of his lip twisted upward in a bitter smile, and without warning, Thrawn's head jerked back, his whole body pressing against the seat. His hand darted to his throat, clutching uselessly at it. "Commander!" Doriana snapped, grabbing reflexively for Thrawn's collar. But it was no use. The invisible power that was choking the life out of him wasn't something physical that Doriana might be able to push aside. Sabayoth was using the Force, and there was nothing Doriana or anyone else could do to stop him. In a handful of minutes, Mitth'raw'nuruodo would be dead. Standing at the edge of the frantic bridge, Doriana looked at the comm display and tried desperately to think. And then, his gaze dropped from Sabayoth's face to Thrawn's control board, the board, and the red-rimmed switch. It might be nothing, but it was all he had. Pushing past the crewers who stood in his way, he flipped back the cover and pressed the switch. And then, even as they continued to pound mercilessly against the Vigari warships, the droid starfighters abruptly turned from their attack and fled. Cardass frowned, pressing the macro binoculars tightly against his face. A sizable percentage of the Vigari fleet was still untouched, yet all the starfighters were leaving. He caught his breath. No, the starfighters weren't running away from the Vigari, they were running towards the outbound flight. He was still staring in disbelief when they finally hit. Thrawn's destruction of the outbound flight spread quickly across the Chiss Ascendancy, and the commander found himself approached by an aristocrat of the 5th ruling family. But despite the aristocrat's threats, Thrawn was unfazed. Because, at least for now, the outbound flight was under his control, and a reward as large and powerful as it would likely tilt the balance of power in Chiss government completely over to one side. By delivering the outbound flight to the 8th ruling family, he could, theoretically, start the civil war. The aristocrat was stunned at Thrawn's reply. For a long moment, the two Chiss locked eyes. Then, abruptly, he turned and stalked out of the conference room. Domestic matters taken care of, Thrawn shifted his attention to Doriana and Cav. Knowing full well that now the outbound flight was destroyed, they technically had no more use for him. He was interested to see what they would do. As he predicted, Doriana did not take action, imagining a future with Thrawn would once again come into play. As for Cav, an energy shield fashioned from the cores of one of his droidicas was unwittingly placed between him and Thrawn, and when he fired, the bolts reflected back and into his own skull. As for Cardass, his days with the bargain hunter were over. Doriana offered a place by his side as a high-ranking networker, and he was determined to make the best of it. After sharing a bittersweet farewell with Kento and Maris, he would encounter Thrawn for the last time. Over the last few months, the two had developed a lasting respect for each other, and while they had first met in battle, they parted as friends. But this is not the end of Thrawn's story. Abandonment, betrayal, death. He would encounter it all, but ultimately, his tale is that of loyalty.